As I start my PowerPoint presentation, I just want to go back to Champlain's arrival in this area. This is the route that Champlain followed when he came here. So he was in Quebec City and he came down the St. Lawrence River at the top there and through this way, down through Lake Nipissing, the French River, and then down the side of Georgian Bay until he came to the Petun area at the bottom of Nottawasaga Bay. And I think we would be challenged today to manage such a trip. Now this map shows the distribution of the tribes in the area. You can see the Hurons to the west of where we are now, and the Iroquois tribes south of the current day Lake Ontario. Lake Ontario doesn't show up terribly well on this map. And I think it's believed for the most part that the Iroquois that they're talking about are probably the Mohawk. I'm not saying anything definite on this, but I think that this is the general interpretation. And the Petun, when they started off in the neutral territory and moved further north, I think probably because of the fur trade. And of course the Huron were their neighbors to the east. But the reference to war that Pat mentioned was to endanger the Petun almost to the point of extinction. To understand how this came about, you need to go back to 1609 in what was then New York State, on the map here in green. When Champlain participated with the Hurons in a confrontation against the Iroquois. This is a map that was drawn by Champlain at a later date, illustrating the skirmish that they were involved in. He shot and killed 9 Iroquois, including 2 chiefs on that day. And from that day forward, the Iroquois aligned themselves with the Dutch, their current trading partners, later the British, and viewed the French as the deadly enemy to be pursued and attacked at any opportunity. Now, is everybody hearing me all right?
Yeah.
But despite the distance, there were many, many skirmishes back and forth between the tribes. It was a 7-day journey to get from the Petun area up at the bottom of Nottawasaga Bay there. They went down through to Lake Simcoe in black there, the large lake. And then they followed basically what we know of today as the Trent Canal system, going through the various lakes, zigzagging back and forth, until they got down to Lake Ontario and across to the New York State. And finally, with canoes hidden, they made the rest of the journey on foot. This enmity was to last for over 200 years and explains the Iroquois pursuit of the Huron Indians and their French allies. In the intervening years, from the time that Champlain first visited the Petun in 1616, and at the time that the Jesuit priests set up their missions in the Petun villages in 1639, the French pursued the fur trade, bringing not only the valued iron axes, tools, and copper pots, but also massive pandemics of disease that decimated the native people. This is a burial ground found at Osler Brook Golf Club and contains a sufficiently large number of native remains that suggest that they may very well have been victims of the illnesses brought by their French allies. It is estimated that 20,000 Petun once roamed our hills up here. But during these years also, the funds were being raised from sponsors in France. The Princess de Condé was one of the most ardent supporters and was anxious to bring the word of God to the native people. This is a picture of her husband, the Prince de Condé, Henry de Bourbon. us revisit the Petun in the 1630s. I have taken the following passage from Pat's book on the Petun because she has captured the essence of the event so beautifully, starting with the Jesuits. These were devout Christians, sincerely believing that the salvation of souls for eternal afterlife in heaven was all that truly mattered. The Jesuits mastered their languages and went out into the villages to build mission churches. The name we most associate with 17th century Jesuits in this area is that of Father Jean de Brébeuf. He knew the Petun better than anyone. Just lost my place. He knew the Petun better than anyone. And during his time as the superior of the Jesuit mission to the Hurons in the 1630s, he toured their villages and was instrumental in establishing the mission of the apostles to the Petun in 1639. There were 9 villages. It's very difficult to see on this map. There were 9 Jesuit missions to the Petun, and they were given the names of the apostles from the south to the north, in the order in which they appeared in the Bible. By 1639, the 2 early Petun sites in the Creemore area that Champlain had visited were no longer in use. But the survivors of those villages were living at the southernmost mission, St. Peter and St. Paul, which is one of the few villages which we know, or we think we know the name of, Ewe, near the present-day Websterville. And that's the bottom red spot there. The Jesuits came to the Huron and Petun countries on sufferance, really as guests of the native people, and not always welcome guests either. Father Charles Garnier wrote, "Father Pierre Pigeot and I have been sent to the Tobacco Nation. We were received very ill there last year. In the second, we've been regarded in a tolerably favorable manner, and thank God we find some who will listen to us. Patience and perseverance will win the day, God helping." Nevertheless, he went on to admit there have been very few converted. One frustrated Jesuit reported that the elders listened patiently, but ultimately replied, "You can have your way, and we will have ours." In spite of the misfortunes that beset the Jesuits, they kept on with their work. Father Jerome Lallemant reported, "We have reason to believe that at last we shall make some good Christians of these poor unbelievers." Attack! In 1641, the Iroquois attacked the southernmost village of the Petun Wolf, St. Peter and St. Paul, Ewe, the one that we were just talking about, forcing them to move further north, closer to their kin, eventually abandoning all villages south of the Duntroon. And although fear of attack was always present, their greater fear was of illnesses that had made the Petun in these villages hostile to the Jesuit fathers, and they were forced to abandon their mission in 1641. I think I'm on the wrong slide here. This is the attack on the village. And do you see the 3 red spots there? That is when they were forced to move north. And that was in 1641, before 1641, when the Jesuit missions were still there. The double colored spots further up are where they moved to and where they were found when the Jesuit mission resumed later on. But there were a lot of things happening at the time that you need to know to understand the events that followed. The Iroquois to the south were in crisis. Their people were being decimated by disease, their fur trade area was being hemmed in, and their ability to trade was in jeopardy. In desperation, they began ambushing the French fur traders in the north, fully encouraged, of course, by their Dutch trading partners, and vigorously renewed attacks on their old enemies, the Huron and Petun, where possible, taking their furs. 6 years later, in 1647, the Jesuit fathers reopened the mission. Father Lallemant set up a policy for the Jesuits that would have that would base their mission out of the village of St. Marie among the Hurons, near present-day Midland, from which the missionaries would go out to the various settlements. 4 Jesuit priests set up permanent residence, 2 in the village of the Petun Wolf, at St. John, St. Etheretha, north of Duntroon, which is the Lower Star, and 2 at Ekerenion St. Matthew of the Petun Deer at Craigleith, the Upper Star. By the following year, 1648, the mission of St. Marie among the Hurons was close to becoming the self-sustaining settlement planned by the Jesuits. And this was just as well. As Father Jean de Brébeuf noted, that because of the Iroquois ambushes the previous summer, they had received virtually nothing from France. Then, in the spring of 1649, St. Marie among the Hurons and St. Ignace, 8 miles south, were attacked and virtually destroyed by the Iroquois. Father Jean de Brébeuf and Father Lalemant were taken captive and tortured in the most horrendous manner. On hearing the news, the Huron Bear abandoned their village of Assassine, the mission of La Conception between Midland and Wasaga Beach, underlined in red on their map. And during the night of March 19, 1649, fled across the ice of Nottawasaga Bay, taking refuge at Craigleith with the Petun Deer. Perhaps sensing the hostility in the village, in May, the Christian converts of the mission of La Concepcion moved on from the village to Christian Island with Father Chaminot of that mission. Some of the Huron Bear remained behind and included the mossback turtle tribe, which had been adopted by them some years earlier. In a tribal council held in the village of Ekerenion at Craigleith, the elders, perhaps influenced by the number of Christian converts of the Huron Bear so recently departed, debated on how to expel the Jesuit priests from North America. When Father Noel Chabanel, a visitor to Ekerenion at the time, left the village to return to Christian Island, he was followed out and killed near the Nottawasaga River. I would imagine he probably had quite a terrifying walk over that, because that's quite a distance, and I'm sure he knew he was being followed. Then, on December 7th, 1649, the Iroquois attacked the village of St. John Etheretha, just to the north of Duntroon. The village was burned, and reportedly many of the old and young slaughtered, and others were taken prisoner. The prisoners were led back to New York, where they were eventually adopted by the Iroquois tribes. The rest of the survivors fled to the Petun Deer villages of Ekerenion at Craigleith. Father Garnier, who was staying in the Petun village at the time of the attack, was killed. The ring from his finger and the religious medal he wore were discovered in a farmer's field at that location in 1932. J. Allen Blair, who found the medal, donated it to the collection of the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto in 1978. With the Huron and Petun tribes in disarray, it was felt that the mission at St. Marie among the Hurons was in danger of imminent attack. The decision was made by the Jesuits to abandon and burn the community rather than allow it to be taken by the Iroquois. In the village of Ekerenion at Craigleith, the tribes were restructured in equal parts of deer, wolf, and turtles to create one Wyandot nation, which is as it remains to this day. As the trading system of the French was virtually destroyed, the Petun Wyandot abandoned the villages at Craigleith during the winter months and moved back south to the neutral territory in the area between Hamilton and Niagara. When the Petun left, the mission was abandoned, and Father Carole the last of the Jesuit priests living among the Petun paddled away from Craigleith to Christian Island in the early spring of 1615. And so ends the saga of the Petun and Huronia. So, what happened to the descendants? Life was never easy for the Wyandot. In 1615, the Five Nations Iroquois renewed attacks against them and their neutral allies in that neutral territory, and they were forced to move on to the Detroit area. And from there, I was going to show you on the map, but I guess, well, let's see. So they went from here, up here, around here, and then ended back again down in this area here. From there, they migrated to Michigan and Wisconsin, northern Michigan, and finally, around 1701, were once again in the Detroit area. Over the next 150 years, they lived through the American Revolution, the War of 1812, and then the new U.S. government Indian policies. Now this plaque is found obviously in Ohio, and it says in 1817, the Treaty of Port Negros opened up, I meant to print a copy of this off, opened up the area of the northwest Ohio for a settlement. In return, the Petun could stay there indefinitely. And this was in the Sandusky area, and that became their home for quite a number of years. However, when the government decided that they were going to resettle the people, they had forced all the northeastern tribes to cross over to the other side of the, is it Mississippi River? And into the area of Kansas and Oklahoma. The Petun, or the Wyandot at that point, resisted for quite a long time, but eventually when the government threatened to move in, they acquiesced and began the long trek to go to Kansas and Oklahoma. And the Petun descendants today, well, there are three principal groups of Wyandot today who can claim Petun Wyandot ancestry from the Craigleith area. They are the Wyandot Nation of Kansas, the Wyandot Nation of Oklahoma, and the Wyandot Nation of Anderson near Detroit. And that's the end of the story. Thank you.